I have two brief questions I'd like to ask, if I may.
Hi, welcome to Left Foot Media. My name is Brendan Malone and you're watching The Daily Question. Today's question of the day: why do we need to stop calling people Nazis? Now, the reason I'm asking this question is because we have seen a resurgence in the last couple of weeks of something that I thought was dying out, but unfortunately it has come back with a vengeance because of the whole Trump border control issue, and that is the issue of people calling their political opponents Nazis, or comparing their political opponents to Nazis, or calling people who disagree with them on political issues Nazis. Basically calling people you disagree with a Nazi. This is a really dumb thing. I think the reason it's happening is because we are losing our ability to reason well, and we are losing our ability to reason in a good, civil and intelligent way in the public square. Basically, this is just the mark of hysteria when you do these kind of things. We're not making important distinctions here. We're not seeing the nuance. You can disagree with Trump's border control policy without calling him a Nazi. You can disagree with Trump's border control policy, or people who might happen to support that idea, without calling them Nazis. It's important to make the distinction here. The Nazis weren't just Nazis because of their immigration and border control policies. The Nazis were Nazis because they had a much more bigger ideological commitment, which is probably too complex to really go into here, but basically, in a nutshell, we're talking about a political movement that committed itself to the genocide of an entire race of people, to the genocide and ethnic cleansing of a group of people in order to build a superior master race. Now that is not the same thing as what we are seeing happening in America right now. And we need to stop doing this because I think it's dangerous. It's dangerous for a couple of reasons. Number one, as Douglas Murray points out in his book, The Strange Death of Europe, if you call everyone an extreme label like Nazi, then pretty soon that label actually loses its power because you're no longer using it truthfully. Effectively, if everyone's a Nazi, then ultimately no one is a Nazi, and that leaves us vulnerable as a society because when the real Nazis actually show up, no one is going to believe you when you say, hey, they're the Nazis. Or if they don't listen to you, they're also going to have a warped understanding of what it means to be called a Nazi. They're going to say, oh yeah, that's just the thing that you call people you disagree with. They're not going to realize the seriousness of the threat. So it's really important that we are intelligent and use these terms accurately and truthfully, otherwise we leave ourselves vulnerable to future risk of someone actually taking advantage of that, what you might call perhaps a language void, an understanding void that will develop in our culture if we misuse these extreme labels. Secondly, and this is the really important one, is calling people Nazis is effectively the setup for political violence. What you are doing is you are creating a ripe and fertile breeding ground for political violence because there are people out there who are unhinged enough to actually believe that they should now be taking up some sort of armed resistance or possibly assassination attempts or whatever else they think is necessary in order to stop what are supposedly Nazis. Remember, the Nazis were what? They were a genocidal, murderous regime. What's the most appropriate response to a murderous, genocidal regime? Well, it's armed resistance. And there are people out there, as I said, who are unhinged enough to actually take that idea up and follow it through to its natural conclusion. This is not helping us. The other thing that people who are using this term regularly in these situations are doing is they're actually helping to create a bed that I don't think they're going to want to lie in themselves. If you corrupt and erode the political discourse in the public space this badly on a regular basis, then what happens when your guy actually becomes the president? What happens when your side of the political aisle is now in power? Well, you've set a template for how people should act and react. You have made a bed that you are not going to want to lie in if you happen to be the ruling party. This is a really dumb and dangerous idea, and we need to actually find more intelligent ways of engaging with these big and important issues. I think that one of the best examples I've seen of someone actually responding to this issue in a way that's nuanced and reasoned and states a very clear position without going into the extremes is the actor Josh Brolin. He was was asked about this issue recently on the Colbert Show, and his response, I thought, just summed it up so perfectly, as I said, without falling into the extremes, right? He didn't do a Robert De Niro and stand up, I've got something to say about Trump. It's like, mate, what are you doing? This is not intelligent. This just makes you look like an irrational, rage-driven idiot. Don't do that. Josh Brolin, on the other hand, says this in response to the border control issue, and this is sort of a transliteration of what he said. It's not a direct quote, but in a nutshell, he said this. He said, I understand the need for border control, and you need to have border control. You can't just have open borders. So he gets that part of the nuance correct. And then he says this, but I think that Donald Trump has been callous. There is a callousness to Donald Trump's response or policy on this issue. That, to me, I agree with that. I actually agree with what he said there. I think there is a callousness. But I also agree with him when he says you've actually got to have border control. You've got to have some way of ensuring that you don't flood your nation with an overabundance of people that you are not resourced to care for. You don't flood your nation with groups of people who are going to be hostile to the nation that they suddenly find themselves in. You don't flood your nation with a group of people who have very serious criminal tendencies and backgrounds that will then start to harm the citizens of the nation that you're supposed to be protecting. So you've got to have border control, but he's right. There is a callousness to this particular policy, and you can be callous if you're not careful in your response. You can become overzealous in trying to protect your borders, and in that way you become callous and morally bad things can happen. That's a great example of someone who actually responded with intelligence, with clarity, with nuance to this issue. They stated a position. They weren't doing a Robert De Niro. They weren't calling someone a Nazi. They weren't losing the plot. And that's what we need more of. We need to stop calling people Nazis. We need to start being more intelligent and nuanced in the way that we discuss these issues. As per usual, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please let me know what you think in the comments section below. And if you like the content I'm creating and you'd like to see more of it, then please support me on Patreon for as little as $1 a month. There's a link in the description below and a link on screen at the end of this video. That's right, I can hear my theme music too. I'll see you tomorrow on The Daily Question.